Are you grappling with a quarter-life crisis? Hate your job, maybe? Perhaps you're looking for that sense of purpose? By the power of my weird hair and great taste in music, I'm here to solve you of all your life's problems. Oh, my personal flaws and baggage? No, I'm literally the perfect human being. I can even give you life philosophies on demand, or would you rather have me sing them to you? I always carry one of these around. You just never know when you're gonna have to break out in a song. Did I mention I have great taste in music? You guys know the shins? Here, just trust me. Just give it a listen. It'll change your life, I swear. Book me now at 1-800-LAZY-WRITING. I also specialize in edgy teen phases. What is up, guys? It's your indie music playing quirky-haired misfit here to dissect a once popular but now pretty much dead movie trope. So this will be the first in a series of videos I plan to do where I just analyze and make commentary on relevant or common pop culture trends. So if I sounded familiar in the little intro bit that I just did, you've likely come across this kind of character in cinema before. And I'm willing to bet it's a movie from the mid-2000s starring Zach Braff. The eccentric, the unconventional, the often laced with childish naivete, often female character that's about to change the leading man's world. Bonus points for dyed or quirky hair. This trope is either endearingly or mockingly referred to as the Manic Pixie dream girl. And if you haven't heard this term before, like I said, it's still very likely you've come across this character template. It was much more all the rage back in the early to mid 2000s. The term was first coined by film critic Nathan Rabin, who described Manic Pixies as characters that exist solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures. You know that typically mocked saying, "I'm not like the other girls." Yeah, these girls are pretty much the physical embodiment of that. But let's not forget that Manic Pixie dream boys can exist too, but we'll get to that later. So, how do you spot them in film? On top of their standout quirkiness, eccentricities, and, well, manicness, Manic Pixie characters are typically introduced as having it all together despite some weird and often reckless tendencies. They also always seem to have unconventional philosophies on life.
It's a metaphor, see? You put the thing that does the killing right between your teeth, but you never give it the power to kill you. A metaphor.
And usually they have one main goal, and that's to teach the main character, and by extension the audiences, how to live life to the fullest. Basically, they're like the romantic ideal in any young adult novel, flawless and intelligent and full of inspiration. And because of this, they're usually paired with a cold or sad or dull character with a lot of baggage. So what's the issue? Why does it seem like I'm about to happily take a shit on these characters that just seem to radiate positivity and optimism? Well, as harmless as they seem, these sort of characters can just easily lend themselves to bad writing. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a quirky character in film and still be written well, but we'll get to that in a bit. Oh, and major spoilers for Elizabethtown, 500 Days, Ruby Sparks, and Paper Towns. The issue for, I guess, filmgoers like me and avid cinephiles who like to dissect and critique movies is that Manic Pixies often serve no other purpose than to simply be the one-dimensional romantic interest for the leading man, or woman in some cases. Basically just simply being there to enhance the character development of the other lead while having none of their own. That's not a problem on its own, but if they're a main character as well, and most of the time they are, viewers often have a harder time relating to these characters since they don't really have goals of their own. They don't really have a fully fleshed out backstory, they don't deal with their own complex issues, or at least the film doesn't really dive into them. So despite sharing the spotlight with the other lead, they're more plot device than actual character, which makes them pretty boring in films. Not to mention that they all seem to be carved out of the same template. Quirky fashion, check. Charming, childish, or carefree demeanor, check. Weird yet unexplainable beliefs or tendencies, check. Good taste in music? Yeah, you bet. These kinds of characters just grew really tired and stale over time. For me, watching them eventually had the same effect as watching the supposedly nerdy outcast take off her glasses and have the leading guy discover that she was hot all along, or the stock high school bad boy.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in. Have you ever seen me without this stupid hat on? That's weird.
What the fuck is this? Or the one obligatory dumbass in horror films.
Sorry, he was scared, okay? I just could have been.
You let a stranger in the house?
He was
Are you a
terrified.
simpleton?
Again, not terrible to have these one-dimensional cookie-cutter stereotypes in films. Sometimes they're just there. But a character comprised of Manic Pixie elements sort of flattens the plot when they're also a leading figure in the story. Audiences are going to be investing much of their watch time with this character, and simply slapping on a stock template's going to make for some pretty bland and predictable storytelling. Like I said, it's the same effect you get when watching these stereotypical moments show up. So let's get into some examples. The first ever character character to be officially labeled as an mpdg was Kirsten Dunst's character from the 2005 romance film Elizabethtown. And I actually hadn't watched this film until I did my research for this video, and while it wasn't great or inventive by any means, I still am a sucker for, well, Orlando Bloom and a prolific cast, pretty interesting shots, and Orlando Bloom, and somewhat dreamy acoustic scores, so, I mean, I enjoyed it for what it was. I mean, I love acoustic folk soundtracks, what can I say? When I think of it, I also like colored hair. People do say I have a quirky taste in fashion. Anyway, Elizabethtown follows the story of Drew Baylor, a down-on-his-luck dude who recently lost his job, his girlfriend, and tragically even his dad. He flies to Kentucky to attend the funeral, and on the flight he meets the incredibly friendly and bubbly attendant, Claire. You can probably guess how the rest of this goes, because like I said, the story isn't new by any means. Claire, for Drew, was like the light at the end of his sad, depressing tunnel. They have chemistry, they hit it off, and while in Kentucky she helps him through his slump and shows him how to live again. Who'd have thought? To be fair, it sounds like I'm taking a dump on this film, but I'm really not. It was actually pretty sweet, you know? Nothing new, but it was cute. Claire, however, is your textbook example of a Manic Pixie dream girl. She almost doesn't seem real. She's pretty much a ball of happiness throughout the entire film. She doesn't have flaws or issues of her own to deal with, and that makes her the perfect savior in Drew's story. And most of all, of course, the pinnacle trait of all Manic Pixies, she's incredibly quirky. Basically, it's like she came out of the mpdg generator.
I'm not used to girls like you.
That's because I'm one of a kind.
Yeah, join the club, buddy. But we never really learn more about her apart from her superficial eccentricities, and because of that, she ends up seeming more like an entity or a romantic ideal, rather than a main character that viewers can actually relate to. So that's one of the most iconic examples of a Manic Pixie, and while a flat character, I guess Kirsten Dunst was still alright to watch. It helped that her acting was natural enough despite the larger-than-life whimsy that she carried. But here comes another much-referenced example of a Manic Pixie dream girl in films, and probably my most painful viewing experience of one, and that was Natalie Portman's character Sam from Garden State. Garden State was written, directed, and starred in by Scrubs' Zach Braff, with a story that follows Andrew Largeman, played by Braff, struggling after dealing with depression and the fact that his mother had just recently died. He goes to New Jersey to attend her funeral. Dude, is this the same movie? And during his stay, he meets Sam, a young woman full of youth and life. Didn't see that one coming. Alright, you guys can put the pieces together, because I feel like I'm just reiterating the plot of Elizabethtown. And as much as I actually love this film and all my teenage edginess, I mean, I'm not quite sure how much I would love it now. Sam was a criminal example of a Manic Pixie dream girl. She not only felt like a boring cliche, whatever, Elizabethtown's full of them, but they amped up the Manic Pixie caricatures so much that it ended up coming off really obnoxious and annoying.
You know what I do when I feel completely unoriginal? Love, 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 love.
For me, she's the ultimate caricature of the Manic Pixie trope. Every single new thing the viewers learn about her is some quirky, unexplainable shit that's just bordering on childish. She has no backstory, we have no idea where she came from. Why is she such an impulsive liar? What are her goals and ambitions? Why is her entire room literally made up of hamster tunnels? Yeah, no, they don't explain any of that. The woman is literally a cartoon. And I mean, I love Natalie Portman and she did her best with this role, but man, I hated this. But Elizabethtown's Claire and Garden State's Sam, two movies that were literally released a year apart from each other, weren't the first ever to create Manic Pixie dream girls. I mean, they were some of the first to spur all the hot takes and discussions and debates, but the catchy term pretty much shone a light on just how common and lazily written a lot of these characters were in film, even in the years before. And for a lot of people, this also highlighted some potentially sexist undertones. Because the trope has more frequently been applied to female characters, many have critiqued how superficially depicted they were, and how these writers can't seem to provide their fictional gals with the same well-rounded, complex development as their male counterparts. I agree these concerns have merit, but while these problems were existent, again, I'm not so much offended by that as I am with just how these Manic Pixies make for some pretty bland and uninspired plots. Cause like I said earlier, this trope could also be applied to lively and whimsical yet one-dimensional male characters. We've got Jesse from Pitch Perfect, Augustus Waters from Fault in Our Stars, Noah from The Notebook, I absolutely hated this film. And to me, all these guys were just as blandly written and forgettable, if not outright annoying. Dude, your cigarette metaphors are pretentious as f***. And of course, if you want to go there, you can even include Peter Pan on the list. I guess some people would argue that he would be the original Manic Pixie dream boy. I mean, the dude even literally flies around in fairy dust. Grantland's Molly Lambert kind of sums up mpdb's perfectly with her quote, "The Manic Pixie dream boy builds up the heroine's self-confidence, providing comfort, inspiration, and nurturing vibes without demanding anything in return. He patiently tamps down her stubbornness and temper while appreciating her quirks, helping her to become her best possible self. He's a nerd, but not an angry or vindictive one. He's handsome, but he has no idea that that he is. His taste in media and hobbies might be immature and run toward the teenage, but it doesn't extend to his emotions or interfere with him getting shit done. He's a selfless, responsible Peter Pan. Hey, there you go. Basically, I see the Manic Pixie archetype as an excuse to not come up with new and interesting characters that stick with us well after the movie is over, because I mean, that'd take too much effort. During their prime, Manic Pixie characters worked with audiences because I mean, who wouldn't love unconventional yet charming characters who don't really have any real flaws? They're pleasant to watch on screen most of the time, and they're often played by someone pleasant to look at. And hey, we can all relate to wanting that splash of adventure or cathartic epiphany at some point in our lives. Throw in a good-looking, mysterious person in the mix, and most of us are sold. The Manic Pixie dream girl or guy embodied all of that. The allure of these characters is that they're enigmatic. We can't seem to have a full grasp on them. There always seems to be so much more to them, but we never really get to see that. But hey, the writers don't have to spend time fleshing out a full-on profile or backstory or any of the development that actually makes a memorable character, because they can say that that's their whole point. Manic Pixies are more like illusions, not fully dimensional beings. Basically, they're props in a story. And that's exactly what makes them such forgettable and boring movie characters, at least for me. Not to mention the unrealistic expectation that they set for impressionable viewers, that there's that one exciting or inspirational person out there to save you from your life's problems. Like how Hollywood set the unrealistic expectation that there are happily ever afters, that adolescence is either some wacky Seth Rogen adventure or a cathartic coming-of-age film full of hot people, and that you too can get the girl with enough nice guy TM tokens. This message, I guess, isn't the best lesson to give audiences, and if you're wondering what I would deem as interesting characters, I will be delving into some of my favorite examples of actually well-written romantic leads or female characters later on in this video. But first I want to address the issue of how the mpdg term snowballed from being valid film critique to just blatant misuse of the term in film discussion. As annoying and lazy, and I hate how cringy this term has become, but problematic as the trope was, the coinage of the term and its rise to popularity actually lent itself to some pretty callous misinterpretations of now pretty iconic characters. Basically, it devolved into a sort of buzzword that people use to dismiss, rather than rightfully critique, actually well-rounded and well-written female characters in film. Let me explain. Growing up, one of my favorite rom-com movies was Mark Webb's 500 Days of Summer. The film was an offbeat, unconventional take on the typical boy meets girl storyline, and off the bat, the narrator warns us that this isn't a love story. What it is, however, is a story about love, and a realistic one at that. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays our sad, lonely protagonist, Tom Hansen, who's trained to be an architect, but instead works a lifeless, mundane job as a writer in a greeting card company. He's introduced as a character with grandiose ideas of love and romance, believing that he'd feel whole the day he meets the one. Oh buddy. When that day supposedly comes, he meets Summer, played by none other than Zooey Deschanel, and our boy is instantly smitten. Of course, the one moment that truly sealed the deal was this iconic scene.
I love the Smiths.
Sorry?
I said I love the Smiths. You've good taste in music.
The Smiths.
Yeah. To die by your side is such a heavenly way to die. I love them.
Holy shit.
And right away, we've got our key ingredients for a leading man in a Manic Pixie film. We've got a dude who hates his career and doesn't quite know where to go with life. He's got that shy but somewhat endearing personality, if not laced with a bit of low self-confidence. To put it bluntly, he's a bit of a sad sack. And here comes Summer, an incredibly cute, carefree, and quirky girl who suddenly injects some life into his mundane routine, who suddenly gives our leading guy purpose. On the surface, it's easy for one to think that this is going to follow that typical Manic Pixie-led plotline. Sad boy meets interesting girl teaches him how to live and listen to good music, and sad boy completes his arc from sad lad to sensitive Chad with newfound confidence, life meaning, and purpose. All the pieces are there, but the writers take a different turn for the better. You see, Tom is the textbook target audience for movies that spotlight Manic Pixie dream girls. He bases his relationship expectations on fantasy and what the media feeds him. He's a pretty naive dude. I mean, for Pete's sake, he thought The Graduate had an uplifting ending. With these unrealistic ideas of love, he decides to pursue a relationship with Summer. Typical rom-com story so far, except she declines. Summer from the get-go actually admitted to Tom that she doesn't even believe in love.
So you have a boyfriend?
No,
Why not?
because I don't want one. I like being on my own. Relationships are messy and people's feelings get hurt. Who needs it?
Wait. What happens if you fall in love? What?
Well, you don't believe that, do you?
It's love, it's not Santa Claus.
What does that word even mean? I've been in relationships and I don't think I've ever seen it.
When she goes along with Tom's advances, she clearly draws a line with him saying,
Hey, I just want to tell you that, I'm not really looking for anything serious.
but Tom ignores this, thinking that between the lines, of course she wants to be with him too. That's how these things are supposed to go, right? That's what Hollywood taught us. So this, of course, eventually leads to heartbreak for Tom when, surprise, surprise, Summer eventually breaks it off with him since she never wanted to get too serious. And here's where 500 Days has often become a misused example for the Manic Pixie dream girl trope. Viewers were of course quick to label Summer as another mpdg based on her carefree spirit, her character design, and the way she seems to inject new meaning into Tom's life. But the thing is, she's actually the perfect anti-Manic Pixie, and the whole film does a pretty excellent job of calling out just how shallow and overly romanticized the trope has become. Tom attempts to pigeonhole her into the archetype, assuming she and what they have is the solution to all his life's problems. He wants to be the leading man in his own little Elizabethtown dramedy, and he thinks this girl is here to sweep him into his fairy tale John Green ending. But plot twist, he learns that Summer isn't in fact a romantic fantasy that's meant to save him from himself. She's a person with her own independent goals, and those goals never revolved around fixing someone else, much less Tom and his hang-ups. She's got her own shit to deal with, and she made that pretty clear in the beginning. More than a girl who dresses in vintage clothing, possessing a carefree spirit, and has her fair share of quirks, she's a complex human. She makes choices for herself, and in the end, those choices didn't involve Tom.
She never cheated on you.
No, never.
She ever take advantage of you in any way?
No.
And she told you up front that she didn't want a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And yet, a lot of people harp on about how Summer was a bitch, even though Joseph Gordon-Levitt himself criticized Tom for being selfish.
And so I'll hear a lot of people tell me, I love that movie, I love your character, why was she so awful, why did she dump you? I think that it's Tom's fault. I think that if you really pay attention, Tom's not listening to Summer.
Audiences seem jarred by the fact that she didn't follow the typical script of a Manic Pixie dream girl and give the leading guy the happy ending we were expecting. So instead, she's been labeled as an evil Manic Pixie, but a Manic Pixie nonetheless, when she really wasn't even meant to be. She was actually a pretty well-written, satirical perspective on the cliché. The same botched criticisms can be said for Kate Winslet's character Clementine in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I actually mentioned this movie before in my previous Netflix gem/underrated TV shows video. If you guys haven't seen it yet, there's a link. It was actually one of my favorite ones to make. So yeah, go check it out after this video, of course. Unlike 500 Days, Eternal Sunshine was a sci-fi drama and one of the most innovative ones I've ever seen. Directed by Charlie Kaufman, Eternal Sunshine follows the introverted, soft-spoken Joel Barish, played by Jim Carrey, and the brash, carefree spirit Clementine, played by Kate Winslet. The plot revolves around the downfall of their romantic relationship and how both decide to undergo a process that allows them to eliminate all their memories of one another. That's the premise of the movie, and I will not say more because this is a fantastic film and I think all people need to see it. But anyway, because of your typical cookie-cutter couple of a shy boy and a hyper free-spirited gal, audiences were of course quick to slap on the mpdg label on Clementine. And sure, she ticks all the aesthetic elements of a Manic Pixie, but there's one very important aspect that transforms her from plot device to actual character: agency. Clementine's character isn't added to the story to fix or help Joel grow. In fact, it was her strong personality in the first place that caused them to break up. She's complex and she has her own problems that give her substance. This can easily be seen through her brash impulsiveness when she decides to just up and remove her memories without warning. And that's exactly what makes her human, relatable, and a character that's better able to resonate with audiences. For all the Manic Pixie criticisms this film got, it did a great job at calling out the bullshit mpdg fantasy, and no other scene shows this better than this one.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours. 500
Days and Eternal Sunshine are just two of the biggest examples of mpdg misuse in film discussion, but they showed just how quick viewers were to fling around the label. And in doing so, it actually robbed credit from some actually well-written characters. Not to mention completely missed the point of some.
From a whisper.
What started off as valid criticism of an empty, superficial film cliche spiraled into a worn-out, overly used buzzword. Actress and screenwriter Zoe Kazan actually lashed out at the popularity of the term, saying how critics and viewers were quick to use it as a reductive and diminutive way of describing female characters. After all, just because a character wears vintage clothing, sports short hair with manic panic hair dye, and listens to the Shins doesn't mean that they aren't well-written, fully fleshed out, or complex. I mean, 500 Days in Eternal Sunshine were literally a middle finger to that. Yet the term mutated into a sort of catch-all that even the original creator stepped up to disavow. Basically, whenever avid movie viewers saw a quirky girl on screen, it triggered their Manic Pixie radars, irregardless of how they had their own character development to deal with. Like, people love to lump Annie Hall, Ruby Sparks, and Margot Spiegelman from John Green's Paper Towns into the same mpdg category when actually, number one, Annie Hall, the titular character and love interest of Woody Allen's classic, actually had her own ambitions and personal goals, regardless of her quirky sense of fashion and impulsiveness. Number two, Ruby Sparks was actually a rom-com turned nightmare that attacks the Manic Pixie cliche. It centers around a writer, Calvin, who, like 500 Days' Tom, desires an mpdg to breathe inspiration into his boring life. When he writes one into his new book, he's delighted that, by magic, she somehow comes to life. But things take a pretty dark turn when he starts realizing that she's forming agency and choice in a mind of her own, slowly drifting off from how he's written her on paper. From leading man, he spirals into an obsessive and eventually abusive psycho who keeps rewriting her into submission. Number three, John Green was actually pretty exasperated by the accusations that Margot was a manic pixie, since, in the end, leading man Quentin realizes that she isn't out to change his life. Despite her weird tick with letters and her spontaneous desire for nightly adventures, she's actually looking for ways to change hers. Ironically enough, what started out as a term to critique tired and shallow writing became a tired and shallow buzzword in itself. But enter the film scene of today. Thankfully, current media has seen a significant decline in the Manic Pixie trope. Movies like 500 Days, Ruby Sparks, and Paper Towns have shown that writers are sort of straying away from this tired cliche, even subverting it to highlight its flaws. Zooey Deschanel, who time and time again has been pegged as your apex Manic Pixie, stars in the mega successful New Girl that once again deconstructs this trope, and in a way how she's typecast into these kinds of roles. While Jess possesses your typical mpdg eccentricities like randomly breaking out into song or doing arguably the weirdest version of the chicken dance I've seen to date, the show outright addresses that while she may have all these weird things about her, that doesn't mean she isn't her own person with realistic goals and ambitions.
I rock a lot of polka dots. I have touched glitter in the last 24 hours. And I'm sorry I don't talk like Murphy Brown, and I hate your pantsuit. I wish it had ribbons on it or something to make it just slightly cuter. And that doesn't mean I'm not smart and tough and strong.
This way, the writing sort of wrangles the two main issues that surround mpdgs, both its existence in the first place and how it's grown into this undeserved insult thrown at actual characters. And who could have taken part in it better than the actress who's been unnecessarily attached to the label for all these years?
You've been mislabeled an indie boy's dream girl.
Of course, along with New Girl and all the other movies that I mentioned, today's screenwriters are fortunately coming out with a lot more interesting romance stories and leading characters. After having their flaws come to light, followed by the extensive misuse of the term, Manic Pixies have made their graceful exit, and it's such a breath of fresh air to see both romantic and cathartic relationships form between characters that are both flawed and complex, who learn from each other rather than one doing all the heavy lifting. Give us more romances like the Before movies, the Silver Linings Playbook, The Big Sick. Hell, they don't even have to have your fairy tale outcomes. Marriage Story showed us that. I'm not saying there's anything terrible, again, about enjoying these kinds of characters. I mean, sometimes viewers just want to sit back, popcorn in hand, and watch cute characters interact without having to overanalyze the content too much. But flawed and just more human characters make for far more compelling and hard-hitting stories, and it doesn't hurt to have more of that in cinema. So I hope you guys enjoyed my little analysis/exploration of one of film's most, I guess, culturally iconic movie tropes. I always found the mpdg creation to be super fascinating with how it spurred all of these discussions and debates on character writing and female representation and just storytelling in general in film. I really enjoyed diving deep into movies and screenwriting like this and exploring their cultural impact. It's an area that I've always had a passionate interest in, so definitely stay tuned for more of these general pop culture commentary and analysis videos. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on mpdgs and what sort of tropes are you sick of seeing or you think have worn out their welcome in media. Let me know in the comments, and like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content and want to see more. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Is Ramona Flowers a Manic Pixie? I wouldn't say she's as much of that as she is just a flat character in the movie. She was just way better fleshed out and better written with a more interesting backstory, I guess, in the comics. No shade to Mary Elizabeth Winstead, though, because she's one of my queens. Just my 2 cents on that.